Hello YouTube, this is UMilzo3. In the previous few lessons, we've been building up an understanding of arrays. This idea that we could have a data structure that stores multiple elements as long as they're the same data type. And in the most recent video, we talked about the character data type, and I thought it was helpful to wait to talk about that data type until after arrays, because we think really of a string object conceptually as an array of characters. So I wanted to bring those concepts together and show you guys how to go back and forth between an array of characters and a string object. So hopefully you know the ways to go back and forth for that. So in this video, what we're going to do is two things. The first one is I want to show you a pretty quick unit called escape sequences. So escape sequences are basically characters in Java that take particular meanings, and therefore it makes them a little bit harder to print to the console. And so we have to figure out, for example, how do we print a quotation if quotations are what we use to tell Java that we're about to print a string? Like, how would we actually print the quotes? And so that's something that we use an escape sequence for. And then the other thing that we're going to do in this video is talk about two-dimensional arrays. So now that we have an understanding of arrays, we can think of a two-dimensional array just as a one-dimensional array of one-dimensional arrays. So it's going to be two relatively straightforward topics, but I wanted to combine them into the same video and make it about 15 or 17 minutes long. So let's get started. We're going to open up our Hello World class, and you can see some sample code. This is actually from my lesson 9 discussion when we're talking about Boolean variables. I've been making these videos a little non-linearly, so lesson 9 is the last one that I filmed, but now we're doing 17. So now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about an escape sequence. So Java uses quotations. We know that Java uses single quotations to signify a char. So for example, remember when we had something like char C equals $, right? And then therefore we know that the single quotes are taken to mean that we're assigning the $, character to the variable C. Okay, and then we know that Java uses double quotations to signify a string, right? So you could say string T equals tree, okay? And then that would be double quotations, and we're talking basically about an array of characters and how we can go back and forth on that. So what we're going to do is figure out how to print a double quotation, okay? So to print a double quotation or single quotation, write backslash before that punctuation. That's literally all there is to it. So let's do an example. System.out.println of his favorite movie or his favorite TV show is Breaking Bad. Let's think about what this code is going to do. You have his favorite TV show. Everything is fine, right? So you have this starting double quotes, right? Obviously, we're going to be printing a string. So that's what we're doing. His favorite TV show is. And then you see this backslash here. We don't print this backslash. This backslash means this double quotes that's coming up, I don't want you to end the string that I started with this double quotes over here. I want you to include this double quotes in the string that was started by the first double quotes. So it's literally going to print the double quotes, and then it'll say Breaking Bad. And then with this backslash again, we're telling this double quotes right just to the right of the backslash that this is actually double quotes to be printed. Okay, and so then the final double quotes ends the string. So now if you go ahead and compile and close it, and you say void main string args, his favorite TV show is Breaking Bad. You can do the same thing with characters, right? So you could go ahead and, or you could do the same thing with single quotes, right? And all you would do, nothing really changes here, And this is actually a little less ambiguous now, right? So if you're doing a string, with single quotes, that's a little less ambiguous, because with a string we have double quotes, and here we would just be having single quotes, but it still helps to have the escape sequence here. And so now you would just have the single quotes, this apostrophes, right? His favorite TV show is Breaking Bad. Okay. And this is not a grammar course, so I don't know exactly which one you would do, but computer programming wise, that's kind of how it works. So those are escape sequences for single and double quotes. You just need to put the backslash before the punctuation. The other thing that we can have is we can enter a new line. So remember that if we say system.out.println of hey, what this does is system.out.print of hey, and then prints a new line, okay? An equivalent way to run the exact same output would be to say system.out.print of hey \n. So what this does, it's not going to print hey \n. It's going to print hey, and then this backslash here says Java, there's an n coming up, and I don't want you to print the n. I want you to use the n to print a new line. So then if you say something like system.out.print of peanut butter, remember that in lesson 1 we said that if you just have system.out.print, it's just going to print this, and then it's going to stay on the same line and print peanut butter. But here with the \n, we should actually have a line between hey and peanut butter, okay? And the first hey was from here when we did ln, right? So we have hey, and then, but since we put that in the ln, then it's going to print a new line. And then we just have system.out.print, but since we have a \n, that allows us to enter a new line in an alternative way. So hopefully you can see the 2 different ways to do that here. We can also have one for a tab. So what if you want to tab out a certain amount of spaces and you don't want to write space, 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 space? In order to do a tab, so \n creates a new line if it's in double quotes. So hopefully that makes sense to you. And then \t creates a new tab if it's in double quotes. So that's what you need to be familiar with here. So what you would do is you would essentially be saying system.out.print tab \t tab \t tab \t tab \n line. Let's think about what this code is going to do. So you see tab \t. So this backslash here means I don't want you to print this t coming up, this t right here. This t means make a tab, and then the one to the right of that is actually a t. So it makes a tab and then writes tab, and then makes a tab and then writes tab, and then makes a tab and then writes tab, and then makes a new line and writes line. So let's see that. It should be, tab, 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 and then it'll go down onto the new line. So let's press compile, and then we're going to go ahead and run this code. So then we go ahead and run it, and we see tab, 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 line, and you can see the escape sequence there. So those are the 4 escape sequences that you need to be familiar with in Java, understanding how to print a single quote, a double quote, a new line, and a tab. In the second half of this video, I want to go ahead and talk about an array of arrays, so a 2-dimensional array. So we're already familiar with one-dimensional arrays, right? So we could have a one-dimensional array that honestly just stores 2 values, right? So this would be a one-dimensional array of floating point numbers, and then we can go ahead and change one of the values, right? So we could say t of 0 is 55, and then if we say for w and t, and then we could say system.out.println of u. So that would just print each of the floating point numbers in t. And since we changed the first value of t from 5.2 to 55, remember that since this is an array of doubles, it's going to be 55.0. So we should see 55.0 and 1.8 if we run this code. And indeed, that's what we see here on the left in the console output. So a 2-dimensional array is an array of arrays. Okay, so what you're going to do is you could think about having a rectangular array. So you sort of have to come up with a matrix. I'm not sure how many of you guys have studied math and linear algebra and things like that. But what you want to do is you want to think about a rectangular matrix of rows and columns. Okay, so if you have an array of arrays, that's basically called a 2-dimensional array. So what you do is you would say int matrix equals new int of 5 and 3. So what does this code does? What does this code do? So it creates an array of int arrays. Okay, so each of the int arrays in the overall array carries 3 ints. So that's what this 3 means here, is that not only do I have an array, right, but the array, normally the elements of arrays are like ints or doubles or strings or booleans, but here the elements of array are arrays. Okay, well, what about those individual arrays? the individual elements of those individual arrays are ints. Okay, so it's 3 ints, but there are 5 one-dimensional int arrays in this matrix. Okay, so for example, in the first index, you would be looking at what array you're talking about, and in the second index position, you'd be talking about the index position within a particular array. So if you said matrix of 4 and 1, this basically goes to the 5th, right? Goes to the quote unquote 5th array, and then within that goes to the second element. Does that make sense? So we basically go down to the 5th row, right? Like the last row in our matrix, and then within that array, we're going to parse over to the second element, because we said that in Java we start with index position 0. And so the same thing happens with with default values. So remember, with default values for a 1D or 2D array, so either one, okay? So for int, remember it's 0. For double, it's 0.0. For string, we're just talking about an empty string. For Boolean, we're talking about false, okay? So those are basically the 4 that you need to be familiar with here. And then, so that's kind of what we have going on here. And so basically this matrix would just basically come up with 15 zeros in it, okay? Because it would have 5 one-dimensional arrays. So it would be 0, 0, 0 in one of the arrays, and then 0, 0, 0, and then 0, 0, 0, and then 0, 0, 0, and then 0, 0, 0. And so what you could do is you could come up with a nested for loop. You could come up with a for loop within another for loop to iterate through the rows and columns of this matrix. So let's figure out exactly what I mean by all of that. So let's go ahead and change some of the values in this 2-dimensional array. So I want to change some values maybe in the first row. So in my very first array. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, well, the very first value I want to change it to a 22. And then also in that first 1-dimensional array, I'm going to change the third element to a 3. Okay. And then also maybe in the, there's 5 1D int arrays. So now let's change the third 1D int array, and let's change the second element in it. And I just want to kind of show you some adjustments that we can make here. So matrix of 4, 0, we can make that 1, and matrix of 4, 2, we can make that 2. What we're going to do now is we're going to come up with a nested for loop. So we need one for loop to iterate through the int arrays in the matrix. And then within that for loop, we need another for loop, a smaller for loop, to iterate through each of the ints within each of those individual arrays. So let me show you what I mean by that. So we're going to say for int r equals 0. R is less than matrix.length, r plus plus. So let's take a look at this for loop here, because what we're going to do is we're iterate through the rows of the 2D array. So it's going to iterate through the 5 through the rows. So here the rows are, the 5 arrays with 3 elements each. So it's like 5 rows. Think of it going down 5, right? And then there's going to be 3 columns. So for r equals 0, r is less than matrix.length, r plus plus. And then what we're going to do is we could say something like for int c equals 0, c is less than matrix of 0 dot length, c plus plus. So let's think about what this inner for loop does. What this is going to do is within each of the int arrays in the matrix, so within each of the 1-dimensional arrays in the 2-dimensional arrays, for each of those 1-dimensional arrays, it's going to iterate through that 1-dimensional array. And so it's going to iterate through those 3 ints in each of those 5 1-dimensional arrays. And it's going to basically print each value. And so the way that you are going to access elements in a 2-dimensional array, first, the first index position is which of the 1-dimensional arrays you'd like to go into. And the second index position is within that array, which element are you looking for? So what you're going to do is you're going to say system.out.println of let's make this a single digit, so 9. So we'll do matrix of RC, okay? And that's essentially what it's going to be print. Let's do system.out.print of matrix of RC. So that means within each of the one-dimensional arrays, the numbers are just going to print right next to each other. Okay, so we're going to iterate through each of the one-dimensional arrays, and then for each of those one-dimensional arrays, we're going to print the ints of them one next to the next, right? And then the last thing that we're going to do, I'm going to put an escape sequence, because I'm going to want to print a new line every time we're looking at the next one-dimensional array. So this is a lot of code here, and so try to take it for granted here, and then you can go ahead and explore with different things here. But before I run this, what you could do is consider changing the data type of the two-dimensional array. So you could have a two-dimensional array of booleans or floating point numbers or even characters. What if you want to have a matrix of characters, the character data type that we talked about in the previous video? And then you want to try these nested for loops. Okay, so let's try to go ahead and print this. Let's go ahead and run this code and figure out what we would get. Let's remind ourselves what we have here. We have basically a rectangle with 5 rows and 3 columns, and they're all zeros. And then what we're going to do is we're going to adjust some of the elements. So in the first one-dimensional array, we adjust 2 elements. In the third one-dimensional array, we adjust 1 element. In the fifth one-dimensional array, we adjust 2 elements. And we're going to want to see 5 non-zero numbers out of these 15 numbers. So we're going to press compile, and then we're going to press close, and then we're going to press void main string args. And this is our two-dimensional array. So you can see a rectangle here. You can see zeros. You can see 5 zeros going down and 3 zeros going from left to right. That's what was created by default. But then what we did was we changed some of the values. So we said, okay, well, within the first one-dimensional array, within the first of the 5 one-dimensional arrays, I want to change the first element to be a 9. Within the first one-dimensional array, I want to change the third element to be a 3. So that's why instead of having 0, 0, 0 for the first one-dimensional array, we're going to have 9, 0, 3. There were no adjustments made to the second one-dimensional array. With the third one-dimensional array, we changed one of the values. So instead of 0, 0, 0, it would be 0, 7, 0. With the last one-dimensional array, you can see in this last row down here, we changed 2 of the values. So we said matrix of 4, 0 equals 1, and matrix of 4, 2 equals 2. So hopefully you can understand why you see a 1 here in the bottom left and a 2 on the bottom right, because those are basically the coordinates here. So this is just one example here. I know that this is sort of a massive and bulky topic, and this is actually my longest YouTube tutorial, but hopefully you've learned an appreciation for 2 different things here. One is that you can have an array of arrays, and then of course in the first half of the video we were talking about escape sequences. So just you know, this is kind of how you can put these things together. So you can talk about 2 different, you know, you can make it really simple here. What if you just had 2 int arrays that just had that each just had 1 value in them? That's fine. And then you could have a 2-dimensional array which just has those 1-dimensional arrays in it. So this is a 2-dimensional array, but it would be like, essentially it would be a I guess you know, you'd have to think about the dimensions here, but this would be a much smaller rectangle. It'd be like a 2 by 1. So go ahead and try to come up with your own examples of 2-dimensional arrays. For geographic purpose and for understanding what's happening conceptually, I recommend that you create a rectangle and try changing values and using the paradigm of nested for loops that we saw in this example that we discussed at depth in this video, to iterate through not only each of the 1-dimensional arrays, but also each of the elements within those 1-dimensional arrays. Just think of escape sequences as using a backslash to indicate to Java that we want to print double quotes or single quotes or a new line or a new tab. And think of a 2-dimensional array as a 1-dimensional array of 1-dimensional arrays. And hopefully you can put the theory together from all these YouTube videos that we've been coming up with along the way to really understand 2-dimensional arrays and put together your own examples so that we can move forward to more difficult content in the videos to come. So thanks for watching. I know that was a bulky video, but hopefully it was helpful for you. From you, Mills03, thanks for watching, and please subscribe.